Well, folks, that would be the Scopes monkey trial of Alberta. We would end up having international attention towards what kind of hillbillies we are.
I've instructed the government House Leader to place the third reading of Bill 10 on hold, pending further consultation with Albertans.
Welcome to Inside Politics. I'm Chris Varcoe, joined by Braid and James Wood of the Calgary Herald. We're here to wrap up the session and in many ways the year in politics in Alberta. But let's talk, gentlemen, about the session that we just saw. The fall session just wrapped up. What stood out for us as our highlights or lowlights? What really stood out memorably for you, Don?
Bill 10 was indelible because it changed the image of a premier. It seemed to be Mr. Politically Perfect, and all of a sudden he made this spectacular clunker of a mistake, which some of us thought was not a mistake at the beginning. I have to include myself, but it turned into this horrible mess that took the sheen off the premier and caused a real political problem and kind of put this government in the same lake of fire as the other guys from the last election. It was really a real mess.
The Tories really seemed to dominate the opening parts of the session until that, and then it kind of felt like we were back into the Redford days, where when Prentice was gone, the Tories lost control of the House. James, do you get a sense of why that was?
Well, I think, I guess the one difference between Premier Prentice and Premier Redford is that he actually managed to stop the bleeding by coming out, taking responsibility for the problem and saying more work needs to be done on this. In the old days, I think it might have continued on for a little while longer. The bleeding would have continued on.
My caucus have heard loudly and clearly that Albertans wish there to be further consultation on the substance of Bill 10.
It's a real pattern that the previous premier had of backing up too slowly. He did it right away. I don't think that takes the harm away, but it certainly gives some credit. At least the thing's not going to be enacted. But the pattern of the legislature has been, even when there's nothing around that seems to be terribly dangerous for the premier, it goes sideways really fast. This has happened for 3 years now. It looked like it wasn't going to happen to Prentice, and it did.
What was your highlights of the session, James?
Well, obviously the Bill 10 issue was probably the dominant issue of the session, but other than that, the premier did manage to have kind of calm the waters compared to what we've seen in the past. And of course, he had a triumph early in the session with the two Wild Rose members crossing the floor to join the Tories, which left the Wild Rose really wrong-footed and raises questions about the future of the main opposition party. And you really got a sense that it kind of threw Wild Rose leader Danielle Smith off her game. She's been trying to adjust ever since that.
Yeah, it's almost like they don't know where to go, Don. What really struck me is that we haven't seen the Tories on the offense during a legislative session, and certainly in the first couple of weeks, it really felt like it was the Wild Rose which was backtracking.
Well, when you heard Danielle Smith giving what I thought was an excellent performance on Bill 10, from the Wild Rose perspective, she found herself, voted. Two of them voted with her position, which was generally in favor of the GSAs and so forth, and the three Wild Roses who were in the House, apart from Jeff Wilson, who supported her, disagreed, and most of the rest of the caucus who weren't there would have voted against it as well. So she's not in sync with her party or her caucus right now, it seems.
The other big issue, at least the issue that I thought really sort of was the reality of low oil prices, interceding itself into the politics of the day. We saw Prentice near the very end giving almost a daily warning of get ready, here comes the pain. $60 oil or $50 oil is going to mean a $6 or $7 billion hole.
Remember a couple of weeks ago he was saying, "Don't worry, Moody says we can borrow money without higher rates down to $60 because nobody thought it would go to $60, and now it's there at $60." We talk about GSA and all that. That's not one of those issues that's going to bother people day to day, generally speaking, in a practical way. But this does. This is huge for the province, and it is the most spectacular challenge I've seen a government face. Well, any of us, I think, certainly since 2008-9 when the prices went down.
All right. So we talked about low oil prices, and obviously that is the major challenge ahead. But what are the other challenges and opportunities that we see for these parties going into the new year?
Well, if Prentice can handle the low oil prices well, that will be good. Wild Rose has got to regroup, but there's an opportunity for them because all of a sudden everything's fiscal, and that's their whole agenda. As far as the opposition parties go, there's a tremendous opportunity for the parties on the left, the NDP and the Liberals, and maybe the Alberta Party too, because it's so obvious that the PC and Prentice are trying to capture the Wild Rose vote.
Well, I agree, and with the opposition parties, the Liberals and the NDP have to really think about how do they have the opportunity now to capitalize on this issue around GSAs, and do they have the opportunity to capitalize on these issues around the fiscal structure, a more progressive tax system, issues that they seem to agree on, but even though they are two separate parties?
I agree with both of you. I guess the one thing I'm looking for from the Wild Rose in terms of an opportunity ahead is how do they go back onto the offensive without seeming like they're too negative. It really seems like that's caught them up in the last few weeks. They don't know where to go, and so that's sort of the challenge and the opportunity for them ahead.
Well, you get somebody like Rob Anderson, who has been chronically and effectively bitterly critical of the government, all of a sudden saying, well, let's get together and work out this budget stuff. I mean, you know what they're trying to balance, they're trying to find there.
The end of the session means we get to pick our top winners and losers for the entire session. Don, who's your winner?
I'd have to say, specifically for the session, Laurie Blakeman, the Liberal MLA from Edmonton, who introduced Bill 202, that became, or at least was taken over and dumped and sort of prompted Bill 10, the disastrous bill by the PCs. And she brought that issue forward. Her position won, her more clear, firm position on allowing GSAs won. So I have to say, as a pure legislative victory, it was Laurie Blakeman of the Liberals.
Well, we saw Nancy deliver a speech was basically backed up to everything that she was saying, so she seemed to win the day, and she won the support of a mayor at the same time.
When you get a premier in this province saying rights are not always absolute, I mean, come on, that's why they're in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. They are the things that are absolute, and he's a lawyer. Big mistake, and Nancy knew that.
Okay, what about your winner, James?
Well, I don't know if he'd like the circumstances that have made him a winner, but I would say Jeff Wilson of the Wild Rose has really, in the somewhat of the vacuum that has existed now with the defection of a couple of Wild Rose MLAs and some uncertainty on the leadership on how to proceed, I would say Jeff Wilson, the MLA for Calgary Shaw, has shown he's one of the most eloquent and best performers in the House for the official opposition.
Okay, I'm going to pick the dual role of the two new leaders, both in the House, Jim Prentice and Rachel Notley. I thought Prentice really brought sort of a serious attitude to the House, seemed to be willing to lower the temperature down in the House, certainly among the Tories. I thought that was a good thing for them. I thought Rachel Notley showed how effective she can be as a leader, and she was particularly cutting, and I think most people would agree she was probably the most effective opposition leader during this stint. Let's talk about our losers, James. Who was your least, the worst performer for you, at least during the session?
Well, I hate to say it, but Education Minister Gordon Dirks has taken a lot of heat for not being front and center on the Gay-Straight Alliance debate, not talking to media about it. There's a lot of questions about what he's doing in the education portfolio. Also faced questions about the portable promise he made during the by-election campaign. And I think his performance in the House has also kind of reflected poorly on Jim Prentice, who handpicked him to be his education minister.
Okay, how about you, Don?
I'd have to say the premier with an asterisk. It's kind of hard to think of him as a loser of any kind when he came out of the federal blue and won the premiership, campaigned, brought the party up in the polls. They're ahead of Wild Rose for the first time in a couple of years. So, but despite those things, there's nothing unluckier in Alberta than a premier who takes over the job just as oil prices fall by 35%. So I would say that force of circumstances have made him an unlucky, not a loser by his own agency, but certainly by force of luck.
Okay, I think the person I would pick is probably the worst performer, or at least had the roughest session, was Danielle Smith. The Wild Rose leader went in on a real, tough note. She lost the by-elections, and then, we saw the defections. She loses 2 people. I think there's some questions now over her leadership, which didn't exist just 12 weeks ago. So that's why I'm picking her as the loser of this week for myself.